I am 77 years old. Yesterday morning, I woke up long before the sun had even thought about rising over the Tennessee hills. It was around 4:30 in the morning, and the house was wrapped in that thick, absolute silence that only exists before the rest of the world turns its engines on. Eleanor was still fast asleep upstairs. I walked down to the kitchen, turned on a single small lamp over the counter, and filled the kettle. I stood by the window watching the dark shapes of the trees in our yard, feeling the cool air radiating through the glass. I had been awake for half an hour. I was completely empty. I had not eaten a single piece of food since dinner the night before, and I was not going to eat anything for at least another 6 hours. As I stood there holding my mug of plain black coffee, I felt a deep, steady clarity in my mind and a strange, quiet lightness in my body. I realized in that moment just how much I used to fear this exact feeling of emptiness, and how that fear had silently cost me decades of profound cellular healing. I am sharing this with you because I wish someone had told me what I am about to tell you when I was 50. I spent the vast majority of my adult life living under a completely backwards assumption about energy, health, and what a human body actually needs in the morning. For over 6 decades, I treated my stomach like a furnace that had to be stoked the second my eyes opened. The idea of waking up and simply existing, of letting my internal machinery rest and remain empty for a few hours, seemed entirely unnatural to me. I thought that by denying myself food first thing in the morning, I was depriving my body of the tools it needed to survive the day. What I did not understand, and what took me a painfully long time to discover, is that by feeding myself the very minute I woke up, I was actively and systematically shutting down the most powerful mechanism my body possessed for repairing DNA and starving out the rogue cells that lead to our greatest fears. My relationship with morning routines was forged a long time ago in Ohio. My father was a man who believed in the absolute necessity of a heavy, immediate breakfast. He worked incredibly hard, and he used to say that a man cannot face the world on an empty stomach. I remember sitting at the kitchen table as a boy, watching him eat eggs, thick slices of toast, and bacon before the sun was up. I absorbed that logic completely. When I grew up and started my own career in publishing, I carried that exact same habit with me. I worked in an industry driven by deadlines, stress, and constant forward momentum. I would wake up at 6, and by 6:15 I was forcing down a bowl of oatmeal or toast, pouring orange juice and drinking heavy coffee with cream and sugar. Even on the days when I was not genuinely hungry, I ate. I ate out of habit. I ate out of a deep-seated belief that food was the only thing standing between me and exhaustion. When I retired and we moved to Franklin, the pace of my life slowed down, but the eating habits did not. Eleanor and I would have breakfast on the table by 7:30 every single morning. It was a ritual. But as I moved through my late 60s and crossed into my 70s, I started noticing a subtle, creeping heaviness. It was not just weight gain, although there was some of that. It was a deeper, more systemic kind of exhaustion. I felt foggy in the mornings. My joints ached with a dull, constant throb that felt like a low-grade fire burning under my skin. I went to my doctor and he told me it was just the normal wear and tear of aging. He checked my blood pressure, told me my numbers were acceptable for a man my age, and sent me home. But I did not feel acceptable. I felt like a machine that was slowly accumulating rust from the inside out. Around that same time, several friends of ours, people we had known for years, started facing terrifying diagnoses. We were getting those phone calls that you dread at this age. The quiet conversations about tumors, about aggressive treatments, about sudden, irreversible decline. I watched people my own age suddenly fighting for their lives against rogue cells that had quietly multiplied in the dark. It terrified me. I started to wonder why some bodies seem to maintain their integrity into deep old age, while others suddenly break down and turn against themselves. I wondered what was happening inside my own body right now, silently, without my permission or my knowledge. The turning point for me did not come from a medical journal or a doctor's office. It came during a quiet conversation with my daughter, Rebecca. As a clinical nutritionist, she has a habit of asking questions that unravel everything you think you know. We were sitting on the back porch one afternoon, and I was confessing my fears to her. I told her about the joint pain, the brain fog, and the deep underlying fear I had of developing the same diseases that were taking down my friends. I told her I felt like my body was accumulating damage much faster than it could repair it. Rebecca listened to me with that calm, professional patience she has, and then she asked me a question that made absolutely no sense to me at the time. She asked me how many hours a day my body actually spent empty. I looked at her, confused. I told her I did not understand the question. She asked me to walk her through my daily schedule. I told her I ate breakfast at 7:30, had a snack around 11, ate lunch at 1, had dinner at 6, and usually had a piece of toast or a small bowl of cereal around 9 at night before bed. She nodded and pointed out the mathematical reality of my life. From 7:30 in the morning until 9 at night, my body was processing food. That is almost 14 hours of continuous digestion. Even while I slept, my body was spending the first half of the night finishing the job of breaking down that late-night snack. Rebecca looked at me and said something that completely shattered my paradigm. She said that a body that is constantly digesting is a body that never has the opportunity to repair. She explained that the human body is a miraculous ecosystem, but it operates on a very strict economy of energy. It simply cannot do two massive, energy-intensive jobs at the exact same time. It cannot digest incoming food and perform deep cellular repair simultaneously. When you put food into your stomach, especially carbohydrates or sugars, your body spikes a hormone called insulin. I always thought insulin was just something diabetics had to worry about. But I learned that insulin is the master hormone of growth and storage. When insulin is present in the blood, it acts like a loud megaphone shouting at every cell in your body to absorb nutrients, to grow, and to build. This was the part that changed everything for me. Growth sounds like a wonderful thing, but growth is the exact opposite of repair. When your cells are constantly being told to grow and divide because there is a constant supply of food coming in, they completely ignore the garbage that is accumulating inside them. They ignore the misfolded proteins. They ignore the microscopic damage to their DNA caused by everyday life. They ignore the small mutated cells that are acting strangely. The body essentially says, we have plenty of resources right now, so let's just keep building and worry about the trash later. The problem is, for most of us, later never comes. We wake up the next morning and immediately eat again, spiking the insulin, restarting the growth signal, and telling the body to ignore the garbage for another day. After that conversation with Rebecca, I could not stop thinking about the mechanics of this. I went into my study, sat in my worn leather chair, and started pulling up articles and books on cellular biology. I wanted to understand exactly what happens when you finally stop eating and let the insulin drop to its absolute baseline. What I found was a biological process that sounded like pure science fiction, but it is actually the most ancient survival mechanism written into our DNA. It is a process called autophagy. The word literally translates to self-eating. I read about this process with a pencil in my hand, underlining almost every sentence. I learned that when you go without food for a certain amount of time, usually around 12 to 16 hours, your body realizes that no new resources are coming in. The growth signals shut down. The body looks around and realizes it still needs energy to function, so it makes a profound shift. It starts looking internally. It turns on a deep cellular cleaning program. The healthy cells start actively hunting for damaged proteins, cellular waste, and old dysfunctional organelles floating around inside them. They gather up all this garbage, break it down, burn the useless parts for energy, and recycle the good parts into fresh new materials. I sat in my chair and thought about my decades in the publishing business. When we acquired too many new manuscripts and constantly focused on printing new books, our archives became a disorganized mess. We never had time to clean out the old damaged files because we were too busy processing the new ones. It was only when the submissions stopped that we could go into the back rooms, throw away the moldy boxes, and organize the files. Our bodies work the exact same way. Autophagy is the cleaning crew going into the archives. But if you eat breakfast the moment you wake up, you are firing the cleaning crew before they even unlock the door. But what disturbed me the most, and what ultimately changed my behavior forever, was learning how this process relates to the diseases I feared the most. I started reading about how rogue, mutated cells behave. These are the cells that can eventually cluster together and form tumors. I discovered that these dangerous cells have a critical weakness. They are incredibly greedy, and they are incredibly fragile. They require a constant, uninterrupted supply of glucose and growth hormones like insulin to survive and multiply. They thrive in an environment of constant feeding. When you extend your overnight fast and allow your body to remain completely empty through the morning, you are essentially shutting off the fuel valve to these rogue cells. While your healthy cells are perfectly capable of shifting gears and burning stored body fat for energy during a fast, these mutated precancerous cells often lack that metabolic flexibility. When the sugar stops coming in and the insulin drops, they starve. At the same time, the deep cleaning process of autophagy identifies these damaged cells and actively dismantles them. Furthermore, in the absence of constant digestion, the body redirects its energy toward repairing damaged DNA strands. It patches the holes. It fixes the errors in the genetic code before those errors can become something permanent and dangerous. I realized with a heavy sinking feeling that for 65 years I had been unknowingly creating the perfect, nutrient-rich, constant growth environment for disease to thrive. By insisting on eating the moment I woke up and snacking until the moment I went to sleep, I had never once allowed my body to enter a true state of deep repair. I was terrified of cancer, yet I was feeding the very environment that allows it to flourish. Before I tell you exactly how I broke a 60-year habit and implemented this change in my own life, I want to pause for a second. Many of you who watch these videos and find value in these conversations have not actually subscribed to the channel yet. If you feel that these observations resonate with you and you want to keep exploring these truths together, please take a moment to check if you are subscribed. It helps us keep doing this, and it ensures we stay connected. Now let me tell you about the reality of changing this morning habit. The protocol I adopted was incredibly simple to understand, but profoundly difficult to execute at first. It was not a new supplement. It was not a complex routine. It was simply the deliberate absence of action. I decided to push my breakfast back. I decided to stop eating at 8 o'clock at night and not put a single calorie into my body until noon the next day. I was aiming for 16 hours of complete emptiness. The first week was a psychological and physical battle. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, and by 7 my stomach was screaming at me. It would rumble loudly, and I would feel a wave of lightheadedness. My brain was so deeply conditioned to expect a rush of glucose at that specific hour that it threw a tantrum when the glucose did not arrive. Daniel, my son, called me one morning during this initial phase to ask a question about some plumbing fixtures for my bathroom sink. I snapped at him over the phone. He paused and calmly asked if I had eaten anything. When I told him I was trying to wait until noon, he laughed and said I sounded like a bear waking up from hibernation. He was right. My body was angry because it had completely forgotten how to access its own stored energy. I had to learn how to navigate the empty hours without breaking the rules. I started waking up, drinking a large glass of filtered water, and brewing a pot of plain black coffee. This is where I made my biggest mistake early on, and it is a mistake I see countless people make when they try this. For the first 2 weeks, I was pouring just a tiny splash of whole milk into my coffee. I thought to myself, it is just a teaspoon of milk. It has barely any calories. It does not count. I was entirely wrong. I read later that the body does not negotiate with calories. The moment that tiny amount of milk protein and sugar hit my stomach, my pancreas released a small spike of insulin. That single splash of milk was enough to instantly turn off the autophagy process. It flipped the switch from repair mode back to growth mode. I was enduring all the hunger of skipping breakfast, but I was ruining the cellular benefits for the sake of a slightly creamier cup of coffee. Once I realized that, I cut the milk completely. I switched to stark black coffee. I learned to appreciate the bitter, clean taste of it. If I wanted tea, I drank plain green or black tea. Absolutely no sugar, no artificial sweeteners, no cream, no lemon juice, nothing that required digestion. Once I committed to the absolute strictness of the morning emptiness, the magic finally happened. It took about 3 weeks for my body to adapt, but when it did, the shift was staggering. The morning hunger completely vanished. Instead of waking up feeling desperate for a bagel or a bowl of oatmeal, I woke up feeling light and incredibly sharp. The brain fog that used to cloud my mornings evaporated. I found myself sitting at my desk, reading complex books for hours with a level of focus I had not experienced since I was in my 40s. But the physical changes were what truly validated the struggle. The dull, aching inflammation in my joints slowly began to recede. It did not disappear overnight, but week by week, my knees and knuckles felt less stiff, less hot. My body was no longer stewing in its own unmanaged waste. My weight began to drop naturally, without me counting a single calorie, simply because my body was finally being forced to open its own pantry and burn its stored fat for fuel during those empty morning hours. When Eleanor saw the changes in my energy, she started quietly pushing her own breakfast back. We stopped the routine of the early morning meal. Now our mornings are quiet, empty, and incredibly productive. We sit together on the porch with our black coffee, and we let our bodies do the invisible, miraculous work of sweeping the floors, repairing the DNA, and clearing out the cellular debris. We usually break our fast around noon with a solid, protein-rich meal, but those hours before noon have become sacred. They are hours of active internal healing. I look back at the decades I spent forcing food into my stomach at dawn, thinking I was doing the right thing, and I feel a profound sense of wasted time. I thought I was fueling my life, but I was actually suffocating my body's natural maintenance system. We live in a world that constantly tells us to consume, to eat more, to buy more, to take another supplement, to add another step to the routine. We are terrified of emptiness. We think that if our stomachs are empty, we are deteriorating. But the truth I have found, the truth that shifted the entire trajectory of my health in my late 70s, is that true healing requires space. It requires the absence of input. You do not have to accept the slow, painful decay that we are told is normal. You do not have to be a passive victim of rogue cells and accumulating cellular damage. The machinery inside you is incredibly sophisticated, but it needs you to step out of the way so it can do its job. It needs you to stop treating it like a machine that requires constant feeding and start treating it like an ecosystem that requires periods of absolute rest. The body warns before it collects. Most people notice too late what had been warning them for years. I am telling you this because I wish someone had told me earlier. Aging well starts with what you stop ignoring. Some damage happens silently until one day it doesn't happen anymore. You do not need fear. You need attention.